Welcome to our telecast today. It's always a pleasure to be with you. In a moment, I'm going to introduce our special guest. You can see the theme behind me there, Jesus and Caesar. We're talking about how the gospel relates in our society, in our pluralistic society. I think we had no idea how perfectly timed these programs would be. And I pray that this will be three programs that will be very informative, enlightening. It may be different. Maybe you're thinking about your own needs and what you would believe God to do for you. And we assure you that our prayer center is open. We would love to pray and believe with you. But I think we're going to address a topic today that is rarely addressed, and I think you're going to glean a lot from it. So my guest is Brian Stiller, former president of the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, former president of Tyndale University, and the current global ambassador of World Evangelical Alliance. Great to have you here, Brian.
Peter, wonderful to be here with you.
Yeah.
And on this topic.
Yeah, well, absolutely. I am really on fire. I read much of your book in the last day, and I think this is so valuable. What we're going to share, I hope that people will feel, even if they feel it's half as valuable as I think it is, they will be glued to this screen. But let's get started here right away. First of all, you're a Canadian. We have crossed paths from time to time and over many years. I think one time, many years ago, we sat on a flight together. I remember from some event in Vancouver, and you spoke in our church in St. Catharines. I remember that. But tell us a little bit, who is Brian Stiller, the boy from Saskatchewan?
That's right.
How did you become what you are today?
I was born very young in the province of Saskatchewan. A wonderful place to be raised. My father was pastor. He was actually bishop of the Pentecostal churches in Saskatchewan. There were 5 of us in the family. Father pastored a couple of churches, and then he was as bishop. So we were raised mainly in Saskatoon. And I started out early in Bible college. That was my first post-high school experience. Felt I needed to do more the education, so I did university work and then eventually moved to Toronto, did my university work there and graduate work, and then started with Youth for Christ, and for a number of years served in Youth for Christ across Canada. And then developed the Evangelical Fellowship of Canada, which is a Canadian, it's part of the World Evangelical Alliance. Mm-hmm.
Which is what you work with now.
That's right. So this, the Evangelical Fellowship is a group of evangelical churches in Canada and missions and agencies that combine together to be a voice to government. And then some years ago, I took on now called Tyndale University, the largest and oldest Bible college and seminary in Canada, and worked our way through some difficult moments in rebuilding it. And over the last few years have been serving as global ambassador for this world body. There are about 650 million evangelical Christians worldwide, and I serve as its global ambassador.
And as you can see on the theme there that is behind Brian or behind myself here, we're talking about Christians in the public square, and that is what the World Evangelical Alliance does through its Global Advocacy Center to the United Nations and various governments. And we're going to talk today as well about the terrible plight that we often overlook of Christians that are persecuted, some killed for their faith. And maybe we can do something positive to help out that situation. But right now, I'm going to get to the book here that is Jesus and Caesar, Christians in the public square. So you see where we got our theme, and we're going to spend the next few programs looking at that. You can see look at my copy. I got all kinds of stickers here, and it's dog-eared. You can see here. To me, this book began to answer a question that I've had. We believe God for a spiritual awakening in Canada, but what would a society look like where a spiritual awakening in relationship with the gospel has taken place? But so to me, it spoke in a large way. And I'm going to tell you how you can have a copy of this book. It's going out of print, so you better listen closely. But first of all, let me ask you this. Does Jesus deal with nations today? Give us a little bit of your thought on that. How does God deal with nations? Or is it just individuals, or how does that relate?
Well, we are God's creation. And so we form political groups. We're Canadians. I'm a Saskatchewan boy. I live in Ontario. So you have communities that have to live together, have to figure out how to operate. And so you have political bodies, provinces, countries, uh, and regions. God cares about how you and I live together. So for us to work out how we live together is the political enterprise. Does God care about the political enterprise? Of course he does, because he cares about us. And the only way that you and I can live together as citizens in Toronto or in Ontario or in Canada is for us to organize ourselves. And so countries are organizations of people. Now, countries are different. You will have a dictator in one country, you'll have democracy in another, and everything in between. But each of those countries are a concern of God, because people are his creation, and how we learn to live together is part of his creation. So it matters to him.
So God does, your answer is in the affirmative. God does
Sorry,
deal with
it took me a long time to say that.
It was all
The
good.
word is yes.
But in your book, I noticed here, and I put a little a mark here beside that, you talk about at a certain time in history. I don't know if you're referring to 100 years ago or maybe more than that. I'm not going to date it. Evangelicals, which that's my background, that's your background, the evangelical movement, shifted away from engagement in the public square. Maybe, I don't want to put words into anybody else's mouth, but we may have said that it's not spiritual. You know, it's about going to heaven. It's about the afterlife, and so, and of course, we believe in heaven. It's a wonderful hope, but there was a shift away. Talk about why that happened.
Okay, a little over 100 years ago, at the beginning of the 20th century, Canada was very Christian in its understanding of life, its understanding of creation. The Bible was highly regarded. Churches were at the very center of our lives. The beginning of the 20th century, you have a division within the Protestant church. You have the division is a shift to the left on what we call liberal theology from mainline Protestants. And out of that, you have a reaction, a conservative response, which then forms the evangelical church. So at the beginning of the 20th century, our community, I come out of the Pentecostal tradition, as evangelicals, we were more interested in the issues of getting people saved, living a holy life, and getting ready for eternity. So evangelism and missions were our concern. When it came to government, civic society, we said, well, we're going to do the real work of God, which is the church and getting people saved. We'll let you guys run society. Now, we did it with an assumption that those who ran society would continue to do it with an understanding that all of life is the Lord's, and that the Bible was the cornerstone of our society. This worked its way well for much of the 20th century, up until the 50s and 60s. We got on with our business of evangelism and growing the church. Society was run by people out of the mainline Protestant and of the Catholic Church.
And all of them had some reasonable respect for God.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it was Christian in its largest orientation.
Yeah.
But we came to the 60s and 70s, and all of a sudden we realized that those who were managing society no longer were doing it with the Bible being the cornerstone of society. They were going in a variety of directions. We woke up and we realized that if we aren't there, if we aren't present within the body politic, if our voice isn't there, nothing is heard. If we aren't there physically, our voice is never spoken. Thus, what we say and believe is never heard. And we woke up and we realized that God cares about politics too, because politics are the way we learn to live together, how we operate, how we facilitate and manage our relationships. And for us not to be there, to be absent, was to, in a sense, withdraw this Christian voice, our concern, from what goes on in public policy, in laws, in government institutions, in universities, in our public schools, in society as general. And because we were absent, there was an incredible loss. Now, at the same time, there was something else going on in society. And that's an overall loss of the Christian presence in Canada. Traditionally, 47% of Canada is Roman Catholic. But when in the 60s, in the Silent Revolution, when you have the Catholic Church in Quebec, which was dominant, 97% there, all of a sudden, Quebec lost its biblical moorings through the Catholic Church. And we found within the Catholic Church largely, with the drop of numbers, the secularization of Quebec, when Canada loses the presence and the numbers of the Catholic Church in relationship to exercising influence, when that is lost, the whole Christian enterprise is lost. Secondly, you have the mainline Protestant churches, as it moved through the 20th century, towards the end of the 20th century, became, in many cases, radically liberal. And at the same time, they lost their numbers of attendees, and they lost their moral authority. So you have the Catholics are losing their presence, the mainline Protestants losing its presence and moral authority, and evangelicals being absent from the public square. And so all of it combines into a vacuum, a spiritual vacuum in the public square.
So now, I think it was in the 70s we started to talk about the multicultural society. Well, maybe under Pierre Elliott Trudeau there was a policy of multiculturalism.
That's right.
And then we have a pluralistic society. So that has kind of been accelerating. And today Canada is very much pluralistic, very much multicultural. And that's applauded, that's embraced. And of course, we welcome people from all kinds of backgrounds. So now the question then is, this having happened, and maybe those who call themselves born-again Christians, having withdrawn to a large extent, what do we do? How does a person who's watching at home today, they are not Brian Stiller, they're not a preacher, how should they think about this? What can people do? Of course, we know we can pray, and we should pray for our country, but talk a little bit about how do we engage society?
You use the word pluralism. Now, pluralism is often seen as a bad word, but there's two ways of looking at it. There's two kinds of pluralism, if you like. There's what I call a religious pluralism, which says all religions are equal. And because all are equal, none matter. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so you can't have anyone who says, this is the way, the truth, and the life. So if you're part of the religious pluralism, you can't, around this table, let's pretend this is a table and we've got various religions around the table. Mm-hmm. Religious pluralism says we're all kind of equal. Nobody can say, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. Well, that's the kind of that's the kind of pluralism that I repudiate.
I mean, let me just interject. When they opened the Congress here a couple of weeks ago now in the States, you know, there was, I saw the chaplain there. He prayed to the great monotheistic being, and then finished the prayer by saying amen and a women. You know, so that's kind of all religions are exactly the same, and that's the pluralistic society.
That's right. But cultural pluralism is a different kind of pluralism. It's the kind of pluralism that I advocate, and it's this. Say this is a political table, and you have various people around that table. Mm-hmm. So as a Christian, I want to affirm the right of you as a Muslim to exist.
Absolutely.
I want to affirm you as an atheist the right to exist. I want you to have the same rights and freedoms as I do. But as a Muslim, I'm not expecting you to be a Christian to be around this table. I'm expecting you to be who you are. And you are expecting me to be who I am. Mm-hmm. And who am I? Well, I'm a one who follows Jesus. I believe that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Mm-hmm. No one comes to the Father except through him. So I make those claims. But this group, this pluralistic group, can only operate when each is who they are and aren't there simply to be nice to each other, but exactly. It's the way for us to agree that we are different. And around this table, we then learn to find out how we can work together. That's cultural pluralism, and that, I think, is a biblical mandate that gives us the freedom. So
there's a respect at that table.
Absolutely.
I mean, what you're describing is for our viewers who are familiar with our ministry, this is what we practice. People say to me, how do you have such success in the Muslim world? They think I'm compromising the gospel, some might suspect. We're not at all. We are speaking the gospel uncompromisingly, and what we find is that the Muslim leaders in a country, they could be parliamentarians, whoever is endorsing us, because we have sometimes endorsement from people. I've had presidents and vice presidents that were Muslims actually endorsing and helping us to get open doors. It's because we respect them, and they don't expect me to be anything other than a Christian. They would be disappointed if I compromised my Christian faith, you know. So it's kind of what you were talking about.
But the kind of pluralism that tends to be assumed here in our society is pluralism that says, well, we're a plurality, and every member of the plurality lowers their commitments, lowers their identity to get along with everybody else. No, that's mishmash.
Yeah.
So as a Christian, and to respond to the question you asked a couple of minutes ago, what do we do today? Well, first
you
of
know
all,
what? I just looked at the clock over there.
Okay.
My producer's trying to get my attention, so we're going to pick that up, okay? Because it took us a way to get. First of all, I want to say this: Brian's book here, it is running out of print. I think we've got pretty well most of the copies that you had printed here, and we're making them available to you. And I'm going to explain to you how in a moment. But we're talking about Christians in the public square. And what we want to do through these programs, we want to help every one of you to speak in the public square by helping persecuted Christians. And I think I'm going to get you to address this, and then I'm going to get to the question. But first, let's just put together a little clip. This is the first time you're going to see it. It's the second time I'm going to see it, that talk about what you are involved with. And so let's just roll with that.
Millions of Christians live where their faith is forbidden or oppressed. Pastors are imprisoned, churches are shuttered, intolerance is encouraged, and the gospel witness is curtailed. Peter Youngren has seen firsthand the horrors of persecution, and in meetings with religious and political leaders, he often speaks about the need for freedom. World Impact Ministries is launching the Stand with Stephen Fund with a two-pronged approach. One, to help individual Christians that are persecuted. Second, to effect change within governments through the Global Advocacy Center, which has consultancy status at the United Nations. If a pastor is killed or a church is bombed, government leaders are rallied to create pressure on governments that tolerate persecution. Some of the work is by necessity secret, especially in countries where the gospel is forbidden. Partner with the Stand with Stephen ministry to help those who suffer for their faith in Christ.
All right, there you have a summary of the Global Advocacy Center. It's a part of the World Evangelical Alliance. And I thought, rather than just sitting here talking, we have more programs coming up, so we won't get to everything today. Let's do something. And I've made a commitment that our ministry, over the next month, we're gonna make a sizable donation to the work of the Advocacy Center to help persecuted Christians. I can get furious thinking about how Christians are being mistreated, how terrible examples from around the world. Talk about what that work is.
it's surprising to us that in this age you would have Christians who are persecuted. They're persecuted in a variety of ways. In some ways, in other religious majority countries, they're killed, their churches are closed, and they are intimidated from following Christ. And if anyone wants to come to Christ, be converted, they are often imprisoned or even killed. You have places where governments will impose restrictions. A communist government or a totalitarian government will simply impose restrictions. Other places you have, for example, India, you have another religious majority country combined with its government who makes it difficult to serve Christ. There are two ways in which we can help Christians. One is on the ground with people who are being persecuted or put out of their homes. And so there are many organizations that work to help at that level. Our work, we have access at the United Nations to the countries that are abusing, that are persecuting Christians. And so our work as the Advocacy Center is to, first of all, document the issues, to face those governments, to build with the UN a plan and a response to the governments that are involved in marginalization and persecution. And so our role with our special consultative status that we have at the UN, we work with the House of Lords in England, we work with the European Union in Europe, with the Secretary of State in Washington, and to bring pressure to bear on those governments with respect to their policies and their laws.
You know, I get excited hearing about this. I mean, it's great to help individuals. A family is hurting, we help them, food, shelter. But what you're doing is very much in line with the Book of Acts. It's what we do in our campaigns. We try to always reach the highest political authority in the area we are in. And you are actually, so that if there's persecution, you would work through the United Nations or directly through governments so that they are aware of the plight of Christians and to relieve that suffering so that it won't happen again, whatever persecution occurred.
It's our view that if we can access the highest level of a government that's in violation of religious freedoms, we can speak to them and bring a coalition of other governments who will also speak to those issues. What it will do in time, it'll change policies and laws which intimidate and persecute. So we have to work at this level, but because we represent, let me just say, there are 3 world Christian bodies. Out of the 2.4 billion Christians, half are Roman Catholic, 1.2 billion, or about 500 million are part of the World Council of Churches, which includes the Eastern Orthodox, and about 650 million are evangelical. So you have the World Evangelical Alliance, the World Council of Churches, and the Vatican as the 3 major world bodies, representing 650 million Christians, evangelical Christians. We have that, in a sense, that those numbers behind us to give us authority, which has then given us access with our special consultative status.
I can see the clock as we're talking here, so I'm conscious of that. We've got to get to our question. Yes. We dropped as well, you know. Let me ask you, take action. You can see at the bottom of the screen how you can participate. I think this is maybe one of the greatest things. We don't want to necessarily compare, but I think it's a very great thing that we do if we help those lawyers and others, Christian lawyers, and they are sacrificing out of their talent, and they are there in Geneva, in New York, I think in other places as well, dealing with governments. Would you help us to empower them? And I thought, often we give away books. We just have given you books. We do that, you know, often. But I thought this book is soon to be out of print because we think that we got the last few copies and Brian may print more. And I said, we want to send this to you, but would you give a gift of $50 to help persecuted Christians? Everything you give, if you give $100, if you give $1,000, and we need, frankly, people to do that. We want to, at the end of this little campaign we're doing, we want to send that money to the Global Advocacy Center. So thank you for helping us. And this is something very valuable in you working like Paul did, who went to the highest authorities. You see examples of that in the Book of Acts. So thank you. I will probably, hopefully, have a moment to play that clip again. But first, Brian, I need to get back to the question. We cannot leave people to tomorrow's program. You have about 2 minutes to talk about how do we engage in the public square in a pluralistic, multicultural society like Canada.
First of all, to see it go up to 30,000 feet or 10,000 meters, whatever you use, and understand that this enterprise that you are a part of, whether you're in Alberta or Nova Scotia, where you're in that community or the larger community, understand that God does care about that this is part of His enterprise, and for you to see it in that broader sense. We get so caught in partisan politics that we cut into a government and we only care about the side that's on our side that agrees with us. So start as a Christian with this bigger understanding, this bigger worldview that God cares about this. And then in your own relationship, begin to pray and to speak to other people about how people can advance goodness in society. I think the parable of the Good Samaritan here is absolutely applicable to how we engage in the public square, to be a good neighbor. So ask for yourself, for your son or your daughter, for the enterprise that you support. How are we being a good neighbor as a witness of Christ in this world? Not advancing my own political party's line, not simply being on one person's side because I like that individual, but to see it from the broader perspective and to pray and to learn to love the political enterprise of which you are a part, even though you don't agree with everything going on. Start with that mindset. And with that mindset, then the Spirit will lead you into being a good neighbor, into being part of that society and being salt and light. And here's where these two metaphors are so powerful, and we can come back to that again. What does it mean to be salt and light in this world? What does it mean to be an active Christian that serves the purposes of God's will in this society? I think it begins with a broader overview and understanding that this is God's enterprise, and try to see it a bit from his perspective, and then move down into the particulars.
So just like so many other things in our spiritual journey, when we open our hearts to see things from God's perspective, then there is a sequence of events that unfold from that. And so you just, in that answer, you prompted about 3 questions in my head, but I'm gonna have to save those for tomorrow. I want you to see that one more time. I think we have time to show that little clip of how you can be helping out to relieve the suffering of persecuted Christians. Let's roll with it one more time.
Millions of Christians live where their faith is forbidden or oppressed. Pastors are imprisoned, churches are shuttered, intolerance is encouraged, and the gospel witness is curtailed. Peter Youngren has seen firsthand the horrors of persecution, and in meetings with religious and political leaders, he often speaks about the need for freedom. World Impact Ministries is launching the Stand with Stephen Fund with a 2-pronged approach. 1, to help individual Christians that are persecuted. 2nd, to effect change within governments through the Global Advocacy Center, which has consultancy status at the United Nations. If a pastor is killed or a church is bombed, government leaders are rallied to create pressure on governments that tolerate persecution. Some of the work is by necessity secret, especially in countries where the gospel is forbidden. Partner with the Stand with Stephen ministry to help those who suffer for their faith in Christ.
You can go to your telephone right now. You can call the number that's on your screen. You can give on your credit card. You can give online. Anything that comes in during these days of broadcast is going to go towards what we are investing in the Global Advocacy Center. Those horrifying pictures of what ISIS did, for example, made us all feel powerless. But we are not powerless. First of all, we can pray, but we can also take action. And I thank God that there are workers there on the front line in the United Nations. And you may not like United Nations, or you may like it. Many don't. But they are there, nevertheless, standing up for Jesus Christ. So if you would respond to that, that would be so wonderful. And then you see the Grace Prayer Center is there. And so any needs that you have, if you want someone to pray with today, you can call that number on the screen. And so I'm down to the last 15 seconds. Thank you, Brian Stiller. We're going to pick this conversation up tomorrow. It went very fast, too fast. And Brian's book is also available. You saw that on the screen. So thank you for being with us today. And remember, nothing can separate you from God's love in Christ Jesus for you. You are loved.
Thank you. Your participation makes this global gospel ministry possible. To share your prayer request or to help bring the gospel to those who have never heard it, call 416-745-1820. You can give at www.peteryoungren.org or send your gift to World Impact Ministries at P.O. Box 62039, RPO, Victoria Terrace, North York, Ontario, M4A 2W1. Or P.O. Box 433, Winchester, Kentucky, 40392-9800. Together, let's give everyone a chance to know God's love in Jesus Christ.